Well, look what we have here. A couple of buccaneers ready to sail the high seas, I hope. Welcome back, friendos, to the Pirate Empire, or what is becoming a pirate empire. Starting off pretty hot and heavy today, the first thing we're going to be doing is building a stone cellar in our butcher slaughterhouse here to store some additional food. We will be storing plenty of meat in there if for some reason our drying racks here become full. Mostly what we're going to be using it for is some additional storage for our onions and other vegetation that we're growing to eat. And we're really only having to do this because the cellar that we built inside our kitchen is stuffed to the absolute brim with onions. I'm sure you've noticed that our prisoner Baker, the British officer, is still in our slaughterhouse as well, and we want to correct that little issue by going ahead and building a proper prison for her and any other soldiers, or really anyone else that we end up taking prisoner. Now this is going to be made out of slate, as is much of the structures and buildings around the city thus far, but we are doing some double layered doors, with the outer doors being wood and the inner doors being granite. That way we don't have her busting out, or anyone else busting out, so easily. And because the setting here is much more beautiful, it should also help us recruit prisoners much quicker to our pirate cause. And as we continue expanding our city, we're also going to be giving individual spaces and buildings to certain professions. For example, our stone cutting is going to be outsourced around our residential area here, and we are actually going to be giving it its own space with its own little, I guess you could say, stockyard full of chunks to cut up. As we were working on this new building, we had also finally recruited Baker into our ranks. No more an officer, now a filthy scallywag pirate like us. Welcome to a much more free and blissful life, my friend. Naturally, every pirate needs the proper pirating attire, and of course Baker is no different, so we quickly whipped up a soldier coat and a nice little hat for her. We ended up decking it out with the black of our pirate party, and we would also go ahead and let her equip a nice rifle and sword. Lock and load, sister, lock and load. Of course, having yet another member into our little pirate soiree here also means that she's going to need her own house, so we would end up building her a slate cottage along with our others. But you've already seen me build plenty of these cottages for our pirates. I think it's time that we start working on a new project, something a little bit out there that you might not be expecting. We're going to be mining out this large granite island. Naturally, given the fact that it's pretty far away from the shore, we would end up having to take our ship out there with the vast majority of all of our sailors. We would end up arriving at the island, and immediately we would start moving mountains, quite literally. For obvious reasons, we couldn't just end up leaving all of our members out here, especially not Captain Miz herself, so we would end up leaving Martin and Brown behind to complete the mining. But of course, to go about having them out here, we're going to need to have a proper camp with food and some places for them to sleep, so we did that before we departed back to our dock. Of course, Miz and Hazel are going to be needed back in the city for more construction and expansion projects, as well as day-to-day operations. But out here on this little granite isle, I'm going to stop teasing the project now. We are going to be removing all of this granite mountain here and replacing it with a lighthouse. That way, when we're sailing on dark and stormy nights, we'll know to avoid this area so that we don't hit any of the rock or mountain formations here. Back home, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, we have a gigantic-ass stockpile of onions already, so we're going to stop growing onions for just a little bit, and we're actually going to begin focusing on growing some tobacco leaves. Not only would we be able to roll ourselves some cigars and cigarettes, or possibly even sell them after rolling them, but we could just sell the leaves in bulk. As I'm sure you've noticed, all of our pirates here are basically stone-cutting machines, including Baker herself. So actually, we're going to be sending Baker back out to the little granite island where we're building the lighthouse, and along with that, we're going to have her cut up a bunch of these stone chunks out there, not only to get them the hell out of the way, but this way we don't have to try and carry on our ship the stone blocks that we've been cutting from the shore and yada yada yada. It's just going to be much more efficient. We also had a weapons trader from our French allies, our benefactor. We ended up selling them some of the mediocre muskets and what have you that we had in storage, and we made a measly 200 some silver. Better than nothing. Jumping back over to the lighthouse, though, we had finally finished up all of our mining, and now we're just finishing up cutting these stone blocks so we can build the lighthouse itself. I hope I'm not giving you whiplash by going back and forth. I promise that is almost over. For the time being, we are going to be bringing all of our pirates home, away from the island. Reason being on that is because we need glass to go about building the lighthouse, as one might imagine, and to go about building glass, we are going to need a proper forge. Coincidentally, this just so happens to be our very next project. Now, not only did we want to build a forge so we can create glass, although that is quite important to us at the moment, and it might be a resource that we can sell in the future, we were also possibly interested in eventually creating our own weapons. Don't hold me to that, we'll have to see how things go, but let's just say that onions aren't the only hot commodity that we're interested in making money on. We wasted absolutely no time smelting down chunks into our glass panes. However, later on in the night, it would seem that we have a pain in our ass. Seems that the Brits are finished sending their scouts out looking for their missing members, and they've actually sent out a proper fighting party, led by an officer wielding a very interesting looking rifle. Rushing to our defenses and manning our cannon, we were more than ready. But it seems like they're going to be preparing for a moment, so we were thinking that perhaps Martin here, and his hand mortar of course, could take care of a few of them before they come this way. Wearing all black, it wasn't all that hard for Martin to sneak up in the dead of night under the cover of shadows. They would end up noticing him, but they were a little bit too focused on holding their position, which was a big mistake. After killing one of them, he would continue pushing forward towards the group, taking cover behind some nearby hills, bullets whizzing by his head and ricocheting off nearby stone. As the sun was finally beginning to rise though, Martin was fully in plain view, and he would end up taking one more life of these soldiers before he would finally have to retreat back to our defenses. Well, it ain't much, but it is honest work. At least picking off a few of them before they make their way here should help us out a little bit. Speaking of which, here comes the onslaught. Ready yourselves, men, this is going to be quite jarring. Their tactics were somewhat clever. As the main group of soldiers were coming from the front, the officer would attempt to sneak up behind us to attack us. Unfortunately for her, though, Ms. is quite familiar with their tactics. As quickly as we noticed what was happening, we ganged up against the officer and her modified weapon, easily defeating her. As for what remained of their forces, it appeared to be one line soldier who also would quickly fall to our bullets. Unlike his officer though, this fortunate chap was still alive, profusely bleeding, but still alive. You know, this poor skinny little chap though looks a little bit young, hardly soldier material I'd say, and I believe this hypothesis to be true as upon closer inspection he wasn't very good at most things. As a matter of fact, I'm shocked they even put a rifle in his hands. As he was gasping for air through the bloody bullet hole in his neck, we managed to make out that he said he was only 13 years old. My God, he's just a child. Poor little bastard, we can't kill him. For God's sake, he has no idea why he's even out here. They may have promised him some sweets or something to put a rifle in his hand and make him shoot at us. No, we're going to tend to his wounds and also to his psyche. It's time that the boy learn that the pirate way of life is the true way of life, and perhaps we would even take the boy under the captain's wing. Just in case anyone was curious, the captain had suffered from a severe mortar shot a few years ago and was actually sterile, meaning she couldn't have any children, but she had always wanted a son, always dreaming of something much bigger than herself. She was dealt a very bad hand in life, and all she had ever wanted had never come true, and everything that she needed and required to even survive, she had to struggle for. It's hardly any wonder why she thrives off the backs and the loot and plunder of others. But so is the world, a dog-eat-dog situation. It's not all sunshine and rainbows out there, folks, let me tell you. But speaking of light, we are going to be finishing up our lighthouse finally. Nothing too fancy here, just a large granite structure that is going to have glass on each side of it, of course, with a gigantic bonfire in the middle. Now thankfully these bonfires will last for many weeks on average, so we shouldn't have to refuel it all that often, but when we do, we'll have to take one of the caravels out to do so. Now while we're still on the topic of our caravels, as I've mentioned multiple times, we want to increase increase the size of our fleet, of course, with many more ships. But also, as I've mentioned many times, we don't currently have any wood. Now, obviously, we could go and trade with some of the French or even our tribal allies to purchase some of this wood, but why would we do that when we could just as easily sail to the main continent and set up a logging camp for ourselves? So, that's exactly what we decided to do. Ah, such a beautiful, lush, and vibrant forest, so much different than our desert island, so much more beautiful, you could even say, but it doesn't seem that this area is vacant. Interestingly enough, this is not the British nor the Prussians nor any tribespeople. These seem to be our fellow pirates, though of course not part of our band of pirates. Not with such a stupid looking flag anyway, and their members were hardly any easier on the eyes. Regardless of who they are in our new logging camp. We began bombarding their little makeshift camp here that they've created, although the water was quite shallow, making it easy for them to come out and to fire at the ship, so we had to be very careful. We did manage to kill one of them with our ship's cannons though, and as for the other, we would actually dock at the shore and then hop out and begin firing at them. Looks like this chap may have just survived though. Sorry about this, old friend, you're pretty mangled up and you seem to be suffering pirate's code and all, you understand. Well, I'd say that takes care of that, and look, we have our very own camp now. Not only that, but we also have some new interesting weapons, such as a pirate grenade. Oh, the ingenuitive type, eh? Well, I'm sure that'll help us out in our conquest of plunder, and also logs for the time being. Speaking of which, after officially declaring this area as our own, we would immediately get to work on, well, first washing the blood off our hands in the ocean, but then chopping down many an oak tree. The majority of these logs, of course, we're going to be taking back to our home island, but some of them we're going to be using to build ourselves some wooden canopies. Now, I know I could have just kept the tents that were here previously, but we need something a little bit more defensive, even if it comes at the cost of our own comfort. This is an unknown area to us, after all. But while Martin and Hazel are acquiring lumber and timber for our fleet of ships, back home we had finally recruited Hughes into our ranks. Welcome aboard, lad. A strapping young fella like yourself has many adventures that await him in the very near future, and under the captain's command, we will be flourishing. Of course, we would do the standard of creating him a proper soldier coat and a nice little cap, and we would let him go ahead and dye it to our standard black. But we would also end up giving him some proper weapons to defend himself and to also help us with our mission. But this weapon that we gave him was the old modified rifle of his commanding officer. I thought it fitting. Poetic even. In the meantime, Hazel and Martin started out the next day by hauling all the resources from the ship onto dry land, of course, and also had themselves a nice drink of tea to get their logging started. Now, it didn't take us very long at all to go about collecting all this lumber, but the biggest issue by far that we face with our logging camp isn't cutting down the wood, it's hauling it across the sea back home. So we would expend a good bit of this lumber to actually make ourselves another ship to help out with the hauling process. You may notice, of course, that this is not a caravel, but this is indeed a cog without any weapons. This unarmed vessel is not going to be near as suspicious as our caravels carrying our beautiful pirate flag, of course, and thus it should be able to go under the radar of many of the military and naval forces in the area. But also the cog ship design actually has double the carrying capacity as a pirate caravel such as our Blooming Onion. Perfect for hauling a lot of logs, of course, but this also does come at the cost of speed. Nevertheless, this little beauty is technically part of our fleet and now needs a proper name. We are going to be going with the name of Seaworth. This wonderful name suggestion comes from our good friend Bad Patat, and I do very well believe that this is a Game of Thrones reference with House Seaworth, if I'm not mistaken, and I love it, so thank you. Not only is this bad boy going to be carrying plenty of logs back and forth, but I do plan on using it for trade in the future with many other items like our tobacco leaves, our onions, as well as many other resources. To prep for the arrival of our timber-bearing cog on its way back home, we wanted to set up something of a lumberyard, I suppose, and or timber depot in the city. Essentially just a new and improved, proper, and organized storage facility for all of our wood, logs, timber, so on and so forth. I'm sure you understand. All in the name of expansion and also efficiency. I will say that I like the island that we've decided to settle on for our pirate fortification and city and base and so on and so forth, but it is a little bit frustrating at times not having so much wood at the tip of our fingers when we need it for so many things. All part of the challenge and in good sport though. Where others have failed, we will thrive and survive. Now, as Hazel is heading back to our logging camp though, we're going to be loading the cog up with plenty of tobacco leaves as well as onions to do a bit of trading with nearby tribes once more. As we would set sail on the open sea, we could really tell a difference in a cog loaded down with tobacco and onions compared to our much more speedy fighting vessels. Though slower, we would eventually end up arriving at a tribal settlement where they actually had someone by the name of Maker enslaved. We were going to buy him his freedom so that he may join our band of merry pirates. And since Hazel is heading directly back to the logging camp, he would have plenty of time to prove his worthfulness. Nothing like a bit of manual labor hacking down oak trees to show us that you really care. Just before their arrival though, around about midday, Martin was taking a well-deserved and well-earned nap in his canopy, but a red-bearded pirate gentleman in a large red greatcoat was beginning to approach the camp. Worryingly, it would appear that he has his very own hand mortar. Martin would awake and spot the gentleman in the distance approaching. Looks like it's going to be hand mortar v hand mortar. We spotted the coward attempting to hide behind some rocks, but faced with us in the distance, he would be forced to fight. A very destructive and explosive shootout would take place, with mortar shells going off every which way. In the heat of the fight, we would swap to our revolver to hopefully get an edge up over the bastard, but he would end up getting a mortar shell off on us. Martin's right ear was completely shredded, blood streaming down his face and into his eyes, completely discombobulated, as I'm sure you could imagine. He would immediately rush to cover to try and collect himself and regain composure before firing his rifle off from a distance at this big red bastard. Though, given his injuries, it was very difficult for him to manage to land any shots, and the jolly red giant would begin heading towards our lumber camp. Thank God as well, for I thought that Martin might start to bleed out before this battle had finally finished. Now with our enemy distracted, we could tend to our wounds. But this battle was far from over, as Hazel and Maker had finally arrived back at the camp on the Seaworth. Maker would hop off the ship and begin approaching our enemy from the south, as Hazel began approaching from the north, and with their combined efforts, we finally took him down. Phew, now that was a close call. You, sir, are one tough SOB. So much so that I actually think that you might be a useful asset to us. I suppose we could keep you alive, at least long enough for you to meet the captain. Something tells me she'll be interested in your services. Thankfully, the Seaworth only took a little bit of damage to the hull with the explosion of the mortar shells, and after a few hours of repair, she was good as new. If you ask me, I think we've seen more than enough excitement with our little logging camp, and we also have plenty of wood. I believe it's time that we head back to the old Mother Island. Speaking of, with the prospect of having many new pirates under our employment, I thought it might be a good idea for us to work on a new building for our residential area. Chances are we're going to be taking a lot of prisoners in the very near future, and thus I want to make something of a barracks, not just a cottage. I also heard a little bit of commotion while we were building the barracks, and I come to find out that there was a giant hole right in the middle middle of our dock. I was a bit perplexed by this, but it looks like this was due to a meteor shower. For whatever reason, our home island here seems to be a magnet for meteorites. Thankfully, it hadn't hit our ship, and there was just enough of the dock left for us to dock our Seaworth as well as our Blooming Onion. The journey sailing back home was so long and treacherous that poor Martin was absolutely exhausted, so much so that he passed out and continued to sleep on the dock for several hours. We let him get his rest. Now that we have the entirety of our crew back home, we can finally use up all of our manpower finishing our brand new barracks. This bad boy is going to be able to hold up to about 6 pirates in the very near future once we get them recruited, and we might start building more of these around the city and kind of reserving our actual cottages for some of our more special folk like Martin, who's essentially our right-hand man or first mate. Glad they got back home with all that lumber when they did too, since we are going to be mining out this meteorite and fixing our dock, thankfully. Strangely enough, it would seem that global temperatures have suddenly risen. This could be maybe due to many meteorites and or asteroids, I suppose would be the better term, hitting the planet in a very short period of time, melting the polar ice caps. Although I'm no scientist, I'm just a pirate, of course. However, with global temperatures rising, this does mean that resources are going to become quite scarce and factions are going to be fighting over them. This does also mean that we could capitalize by selling more of our onions and other resources to these factions. So kind of a win for us, I suppose. Now, given the fact that we already want to do a lot of trading anyhow, and given the current circumstances that we're going to have a lot of resources that are going to be in demand, on the outskirts of the city we would end up building a secondary dock, this one specifically for our trade vessels. And adding on to that, since we're going to be doing all of our trade vessels on this side of the city, we also want to have a trade depot and a warehouse with all of our resources that we sell on this side of the city just next to the dock here. Essentially just a gigantic warehouse where we're going to be storing all of our resources. Long gone are the days where we need our primitive storage methods like digging a pit in the ground and hiding all of our silver and cocoa beans and tobacco leaves there. Now we can store them in a proper sealed facility, and a sturdy, secure one at that. Not only is this facility much more secure, but of course it is going to be much more efficient as well as convenient, having it right next to all of our new ships. Speaking of, it's time for us to increase the size of our fleet once more with yet another cog ship. And with that, our new trading depot is finally completed. Now, of course, if you fine folks have any ideas for a name for our new cog trading vessel, be sure to let me know in the comments section down below. I am working on this episode before the last even comes out, so if you've already provided a name, rest assured that I will be checking that episode as well. But enough with the trading vessels. It's time that we finally have one that is prepped for combat. Yet another pirate caravel, making it a fleet of 3. Not counting the cogs, of course. Not just any caravel though, this is going to be our flagship, and we shall be giving it the intimidating name of Black Widow. This name has been provided by our compadre Beau Furlong 8944, and is somewhat based on the fact that our great Captain Miz here is indeed something of a widow, even though the two were never really married. Her ex-fiance, you could say, who died, and I think Black Widows normally kill their partners, and she didn't kill him, but nevertheless, I love the name. I noticed on the main continent it would appear that 2 factions are already battling over some nearby resources, while this warming of the globe really is taking shape already. I'm thinking next episode we may try to get tangled up with that a little bit, but we'll see how we're feeling and where it goes. But before the episode ends, I want to mention something that our good friend Storyteller Nylan9157 points out, as well as what many of you other fine folk have enlightened me on, that we're not exactly pirates. We are, but we would be more akin to privateers, given the fact that we are essentially paid by the French either in trade, plunder, or even just monetary sums. I do agree, and I think it's really cool that you guys are invested in this enough to really educate me on this kind of stuff, and I really like it, I love it, I appreciate it. I probably will still use the two terms privateers and pirates interchangeably just because it flows better for me, but I love it still, so thank you all for that. But my friends, I must bid you farewell, for in the very near future though, we shall be getting plenty more riches, plunder, and seeing many more new horizons. Until then,